It was a bright sunny spring afternoon for the FA Cup semi-final match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest on April 15th, 1989 at the Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, England. Now the match was expected to be fully sold out with over 50,000 people in attendance, and they split the stadium in two, giving Nottingham Forest the east and the south stands and Liverpool the north and the west stands. The problem with this was they were expecting more Liverpool supporters than they were Nottingham Forest supporters, and the side of the stadium they gave Liverpool supporters to enter was a very narrow area that turned into a bottleneck. The match itself was set to start at 3 p.m. and fans had been told to be in the stadium by 2:45 p.m. and so at about 2:40, Liverpool fans started to line up at the gates to the actual stadium to try and get in. Now, on the west end of the stadium, just off Leppings Lane, the only place Liverpool supporters could enter the stadium, there were 23 total turnstiles. There were 10 for the north stands, there were 6 for the upper section of the west stands, and there were 7 for the lower standing room only area of the west stands. But you had to go to the proper turnstiles, otherwise you couldn't make it to any other sections of the stands. So if you were in the north stands and you went to the upper section of the west stands, you had to turn around and go back. The problem was, there were so many people that had crowded around to get into the stadium for the start of the game that people that went to the wrong section couldn't walk back because there were so many people in the way. At about 2:50 p.m., when players went out onto the pitch to begin warm-ups, the fans outside could hear fans inside the stadium cheering, and they began to surge forward even more to try and get through the gates faster. A police constable, realizing what was going on, radioed to game control to ask them to delay the match 20 minutes and was denied. At 3 o'clock, when the game kicked off, the crowd surge became even more pronounced and police opened several gates in an attempt to allow more people into the stadium quicker to alleviate the problem outside the gates. But then the real struggle began, because as these gates opened, people streamed into a narrow tunnel that led to 2 pins that had been created after a crowd crush previously had happened at Hillsborough Stadium that kept them pinned in a single area with a fence up against the pitch and then fences on either side. Now, on a normal game day, police would be posted on the outside of pins 3 and 4, the 2 center ones, so that when it became full, they could direct people to the other pins on either side, pin 2 and 6. But that wasn't done this day for reasons that have never fully been actually explained. So pins 3 and 4 quickly became overwhelmed with people, and individuals began trapped at the front, but the people all the way in the back had no idea what was going on and just continued to push forward. From about 3 p.m. to 3:04 p.m., the rapidly deteriorating situation in pins 3 and 4 on the west end of Hillsborough Stadium went largely unnoticed except by the people who were in the crowd crush and the police located just outside on the pitch itself. At that time, many people began attempting to climb the fence up over the top, and police shoved them back off, thinking that it was an attempted pitch invasion. At this time, the Liverpool goalie could hear people in the stands behind him begging him to do something to help them get out of the situation. At 3:04 p.m., as a Liverpool shot went off the crossbar, the crowd surged forward even more in one of the pins, breaking the gate down and sending people tumbling onto the pitch itself. At 3:05 p.m., a police officer finally realized what was going on, ran out on the pitch to get the referee's attention, and stopped the match. At this point, many fans were trying to climb the fence, people that had made it over were ripping holes in the fence to pull people through, and fans in the upper west stand were pulling people up over the actual barrier to bring them to safety. As fans began to spill out onto the pitch due to the fences being pulled down, other fans that were uninjured began doing CPR and other life-saving measures on those who were unconscious from the crush itself. Specifically, because there was a casualty reception point that had been set up prior to the match that was where they were supposed to be taken from any location in the stadium. But that particular protocol had to be formally declared by the police in charge. It would take them several minutes to actually do that, long enough for ambulance services to become confused. Many paramedics leave their ambulances with and without equipment to try and get to the people on the pitch itself, and then it created a traffic jam of ambulances as people came back, but some people weren't in their ambulances to move them. It became a massive cluster. In total, 94 people would die the day of the disaster of compressive asphyxia. One person would die 2 days later in the hospital, and then a 96th person would die in 1993, and a 97th person would die in 2021 from brain damage suffered in the disaster. Now, in the aftermath of the disaster, the South Yorkshire Police match commander, David Duckenfield, told anyone that would listen, essentially, that the problem was Liverpool supporters were drunk and they forced open the gates against the will of police officers and jammed themselves into the stadium, causing the disaster themselves. The problem with that statement is he is the one that told his police officers to open those gates to allow the fans into the stadium themselves. In fact, during the initial Taylor inquiry, which happened in 1990, the commanders of the South Yorkshire Police essentially said that all of the blame lay with Liverpool supporters, and they refused to take any accountability for the disaster that happened. Also, in the aftermath of the disaster, it was found that many of the South Yorkshire police officers that were there either changed their account of the disaster to place more blame on drunk Liverpool supporters or had them changed by someone else. It would take until 2017 for anyone to be charged with any crime for the Hillsborough disaster, of which David Duckenfield, the match commander at the time, was charged with 95 counts of manslaughter. 2 years later, he would be found not guilty on all charges. In the end, the Hillsborough disaster still remains the deadliest sporting disaster in English history. Yep, it's a whiteboard video. So in order to understand the Hillsborough disaster, you have to first understand how the stadium was set up on the day of the game. It was a semifinal for the FA Cup in a domestic game. This was a big game for both of these teams. And in order to, prevent the fans of either side beating the crap out of each other, they separate the stadium into two different sections. They'll put Liverpool on one end and Nottingham Forest on the other. So Liverpool on that day got the north and the west end, and Nottingham Forest down here in the orange got the south and the east end. Now, Nottingham Forest is in orange because, if you want to be your right color, then win the Premier League. Anyway, this was done specifically because Liverpool is actually located west of Hillsborough Stadium, and Nottingham Forest is located down here south of Hillsborough Stadium. So the majority of their supporters, the Nottingham Forest supporters, are going to come up this direction. The majority of Liverpool supporters are going to come this direction. That way, they never cross, and we don't have any issues outside of the actual stadium itself. But the way this was set up initially even caused a problem because they were expecting more Liverpool supporters than they were Nottingham Forest supporters. The Nottingham Forest two halves added up to about 30,000 seats. The Liverpool half added up to about 24,000 seats. So they were already short seats for what they were expecting for Liverpool supporters, probably by about 6,000 total seats. Now, in addition to that, over here on the west side, they had this section right here in the lower portion of the west stands that was essentially standing room only that was divided up into these pins. And what I mean by that is this. So if you're looking at the west end of the stadium, you have your goal, you have your normal barriers. In 1981, Hillsborough suffered a crowd crush that, while it didn't kill anyone, caused several injuries and had an inquiry afterward that basically said Hillsborough Stadium needs to change its layout so that it's more safe and reduce its capacity. The chairman at the time said, bollocks, no one would have been killed, which is a terrible foreshadowing in this case. But what they did was they added a fence across the front to help with hooliganism and pitch invasions, but they also added sections like so, basically dividing this end of the stadium into pins. So when these two pins in the middle got full, they could have people on the backside push people to the outer pins and make it so that it couldn't allow back and forth movement across this direction to make sure that there wasn't so much crowding as the game moved, and they could send people into different areas. What this looked like from above was this. People would come in this direction, into this tunnel. They would go through the tunnel here, and they would either be herded into 4 or herded into 3. And if 3 and 4 got too busy, they would be herded further down into 2 down here, or 6 and 7 up here. That was what was supposed to happen. There were supposed to be police officers that were posted at the beginning of this tunnel to keep an eye on these two, because those are in the middle, so obviously people want to be directly behind the goal. So they would have police officers here, so that if these two got too full, they could send them up into 6 or down into 2, so that you wouldn't have an overcrowding issue. So on the day of the actual disaster, all Liverpool fans had to enter through this perimeter gate right here coming in this direction. They could not get into any other portion of the stadium except through this gate here. Now, once you came through these gates, you had to choose which section you were going to be in based on what your ticket was. So if your ticket said you were in the north section, you had to go through these 10 turnstiles right here. If you were in this upper west stand right here, you had to go through these 6 turnstiles right here. If you were in these pins down here, you had to go through these 7 turnstiles right here. Now, this section sat about 9,700 fans or so. That's an extra 0. This one sat about 4,500, give or take, and this one sat about 10,000. So obviously this one's going to be the busiest because there's 10,000 people here, but it only has 7 turnstiles. So as you went through these perimeter gates, if you picked the wrong section, say there's, 5,000 Liverpool supporters trying to get in at the same time, give or take some, and you happen to think, okay, I'm in the west stand, but this one seems to be the right one, but you're actually supposed to be down here. If you got up here, there's a fence right here. All of these black lines right here are fences. So if you went in here and tried to get in through here, you would be turned away because you didn't have the proper ticket. But so many people were coming in this one entrance that when you got to here said, nah, you can't come in this way, you got to go around and come into here. They couldn't get back through the crowd in order to get to the right section. So they were just kind of stuck. In addition, it was a very popular match, and a lot of people were trying to get in without tickets. So they would show up at the turnstile, the security guard would say, nah, you don't have a ticket, go away. They would try and get back, but they couldn't because so many people were trying to enter. Now, you have all of these people coming in here. They were supposed to be in their seats 15 minutes before the game starts at 2. The game starts at 3 o'clock. They should be to their section at 2:45. At 2:20, they begin to start lining up and getting in there, and very quickly overwhelm the turnstiles in this area trying to get in. So you have all of this area just packed full of people trying to get through to the game that they're very excited to see because it's a very important game. All of this area is completely full. Everybody's trying to get in here, going here, going here. Now, about 10 minutes before the game starts, about 2:50, Liverpool and Nottingham Forest run onto the field to do their warm-ups and general before-game activities. And at that point, a lot of the Nottingham Forest supporters had already been in the stands because their side of the stadium had significantly more turnstiles and significantly more area for all of them to get in. So the fans out here hear a very loud cheer from inside the stadium. Nottingham Forest supporters excited their team came out. So they surge forward and they begin to start a crowd crush at the front of these turnstiles as people that have gone to the wrong place are trying to get back. People that are trying to get inside to see their team are trying to get in. It is a massive crush. And because everyone's on a level field, no one in the back that's out here can see what's going on in here. They just know they have a purpose. They want to get from point A to point B. And point B has the thing that they paid a lot of money for, that they want to see, that they're very excited for. So they continue to push. At some point, one of the police officers that's down here working crowd control realizes this is developing into a very bad situation. So he radios to David Duckenfield, and says, hey, we need to do something. And he orders this gate right here to be opened. Great. So now we have supporters coming around here and flooding through into here. That's not helping enough. So then they open this gate right here. So now we have people that are in here. Remember, this is the most amount of people, 10,000. We have people here flooding into here. There is another gate that is opened right about here. So they flood in through here and down this direction. Then this gate up here gets opened and they start flooding in this direction. And then there's another gate that's opened right about here. They begin flooding and we have several thousand people who all of a sudden are trying to get out here because at this point, the game has kicked off. It is 3 o'clock. The game has kicked off. A police officer had called to say, hey, game control, can you delay it 20 minutes? And they were told, no, we're not going to do that. So all of these fans who have paid a lot of money for this are very disgruntled that they have missed the opening kickoff. So they are flooding as quick as they can to get into this tunnel. And the best seats outside this tunnel pins 3 and pins 4. And they are flooding into this tunnel. They are pushing so fast that everyone that's already in here is getting shoved up against the fence line right here, and no one back here can see or hear what's going on here because it is a stadium full of thousands of people cheering for their team to go on to a championship game. So as more and more people are funneling into this tunnel, it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter in the front of this actual pin right here, until eventually people inside the pins are squeezed so tight that their lungs can no longer expand and they die of compressive asphyxiation standing upright. Now, normally there are supposed to be cops standing here and here to direct people into different pins once these two get full. But for some reason, probably because the guy that was in charge had never done it before, no police officers were positioned at these posts to tell anyone to go anywhere else. So they just continued to feed into those two locations until eventually the fences broke and people were pulled out, and it left 97 people dead.